Hey fellow gliders, welcome back. This is Robert Petito, and in this video we're going to take a look at the nuances of a form screen in Glide. The form screen is a very tricky screen to navigate for new users because you have this strange dichotomy of environments, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And then ultimately what we're going to do is take a look at some of the restrictions that a form screen has, some of the benefits that it has over some other solutions, and then I'm going to show you a quick little hack that you can do inside of a form screen to build out some functionality that Glide natively does not provide for you for a form screen. So make sure you stay tuned to the end of the video so you can check out that magic. So go ahead and take a look at an app that I quickly developed that leverages a form screen so we can talk more. So this app's premise is about project approvals. The data tables are pretty simplistic. I have a users table with some sample users. I have a projects table with a couple of projects and whether or not the approval requires a signature. And then I have an approvals table, which is going to record the project that was approved, the timestamp, email, some notes, and a signature. And the thought is that we're going to have a project screen that will have a form button. And that form button will open up a forms screen that will write to the approvals table. So in the layout, I have a screen with a collection that's displaying my list of projects. I'm displaying it as a card view. That way I have a button that can appear on each card in order to approve the project. The action on this button is to show a form screen. And here's where our conversation is going to start. So when I click on this button to approve project, it opens up the form screen. And when you enter into a form screen, you're suddenly thrust into like this no man's land, this dichotomy of environments, where on one side of the environment, you have your source table. In this case, the app knows that this form screen is sourced from the projects table because I clicked into project one. And we see that my context here is the first record, project one, inside of the projects table. And so I can leverage any of these columns for display purposes inside of the form screen. So here you see I'm displaying the project one, and I'm displaying that it requires a signature instead of a fields component here, right? So any of these values are fair game for display purposes. You can also use any of these values to pass along in a form screen using special values. So we see here that, yes, I'm asking for the user to fill out some of these items using some components in a form screen, but I can also pass some values along the back end. In this case, I'm passing the name of the project directly to the project field inside of my approvals table. All right. And you do that using screen values. So you see these values from screen where I have the row ID, item, whether or not it requires a signature, and then some text. These exactly mimic the columns of the record that I'm currently displaying. So I can pass these along the back end when I go to submit my form. So that's one of the nice things about using a form screen is that you can leverage these values pretty readily. Now, the other half of the environment of a form screen is the destination side of things. So if I were to click on my form at the top right here, we see that the destination table is my approvals table. And inside of the approvals table, again, I have some columns where I'm recording some of these values, and any of the components that I add inside of my form screen that require a user to fill out some information, any of my entry components, I can have them write to these specific columns. So any of the edit components here, which are entry type components, as well as some of the miscellaneous ones that are kind of scattered throughout here. For example, we have a location component, audio recorder, rating component, signature component, barcode scanner, right? All of these can also write to or be a component that allows you to enter in a value for the destination side of things. So that's part of the dichotomy of a form screen that new users have to navigate, is that an entry component will have half of the component could be configured for where you're writing to, whereas the other half of it, like the design portion of it, you can actually pull values from the screen you're currently on. Another way you can use the values from the source table here are in some of the entry components that have default values. For example, text entries and number entries and choice components allow you to set a default value when you're inside of a form screen. So in this case, if I wanted to set some default notes, or I wanted to put the name of the signature, maybe the default name here is the person who's signed in right now. Right? I can put in their names. That way, this will automatically be a value. Right? So I can choose something from the user table or something from the context of the project that I'm currently viewing. Right? So all of that is pretty straightforward. Right? I can display values that I have the context of, or I can enter values that point to the destination table. Okay. Where it gets confusing is when you start wanting to add filters or visibility conditions to some of the components inside of your form screen. Where you typically see this a lot is with choice components or entry components that should have a visibility condition based upon something else you've already entered. For example, here I have a signature and a name of a signature. And maybe I don't want them to fill out their name until after they've signed, right? You can do that with a form screen because the visibility conditions that you set on any component within inside of a form screen all relate to values that have been entered. So here, if I set a visibility condition for my name, my text entry, right, for the name, you see I can set it for any of the values in the destination table as the condition. So in this case, I want to show the name only when the signature is not empty, which means someone has already filled it out. So I can sign my name, which is not my signature, but whatever. Okay, and then you see that the name appears. Other times where I use this is if I want them to add in a couple of images. Maybe I have in this approvals, they need to have a couple of attachments. So I can say attachment 1 and attachment 2. But I don't want just to have a bunch of file pickers. I want it to be kind of staggered here, right? So I could say a file picker for attachment 1 and another file picker for attachment 2. But I only want to show a second attachment if they've already filled out a first one, right? That kind of just to kind of keep things clean. Again, same thing. I can set a visibility condition so that the second attachment picker, right, file picker, will only show up when they've already attached a first thing. So when attachment 1 is not empty, right? So now you see that attachment 2 is not there. But if I attach a file here, just pick something random. Once this uploads, we now see I can add in a second attachment, right? So you kind of get the idea, right? Visibility conditions and filters all pertain to values that have been entered. So where this gets confusing is that you can't set a visibility condition on any item in here based upon the source screen, right? You see that when I go to add a visibility condition for any of these items, right, the columns that I get to work with are the columns that are inside of the destination table, not the ones that are inside of my source table, which can be problematic because let's say as part of this whole project approvals app, right, some projects require a signature. Right? But if I were to go to a different project, project number 2 here, we see it does not require a signature. So that means I don't want there to be a signature component to show up, and I don't want there to be a name of the signature to show up either. So I want these two things to be conditional based upon the source field of require signature being true or false. But you'd think it'd be as easy as going to the signature component here adding a visibility condition and saying, hey, only show this when requires signature, right? This guy here is true. But again, I don't get those columns here because these are the destination columns, right? So because of this limitation in Glide, what a lot of us do are create what's called custom forms, which is basically not using a form screen, but rather using a detail screen and creating a form-like experience on there using a bunch of user-specific columns for data entry, and then a final action button that adds a row using the add row action, and then having to go back and then clear those user-specific values so the next time you enter in that detail screen. So it can be kind of laborious. It's very tedious to set up, especially for larger forms. It actually requires more updates because one of the benefits of using a form screen is that it doesn't charge you any updates against your quota until you actually submit the form, and then you only get charged one update for an add row. Whereas if you use a custom form, you get charged every single time you dive into any entry, edit something, and then leave that component. So all that to say, I try to avoid custom forms whenever I can. But it almost seems like this use case warrants it, right? I need to have some other functionality here where I can tap into this requires signature Boolean box here somehow, right? But you see here, I only have access to my destination columns. Well, that's only half true. I have access to my destination columns, but I also have access to my user profile screen. And so this is what got me thinking, is there a way we can hack a form screen where we can take the values that we need for with the context of this particular form screen, somehow throw them into the user profile table dynamically so that way we can leverage them as part of the conditionality that we're looking for on these different components. And I was able to come up with a solution, and we're going to walk you through it now. So bear with me here. It takes just a couple of columns inside of your users table in order to make this happen. So the first thing we have to remember is that right now I have this context of project 2, right? Which lives inside of my projects table. And in order to get this functionality to work correctly, you have to have a row ID column already entered into your source screen, which I already do. Okay, and your project has to be published, so which it already is. Okay, next, if I were to switch this view from the mobile preview to the desktop preview, you'll see that it provides a preview here of the URL of this screen. So anytime I switch screens, the URL here, this URL preview, actually changes. So it's kind of hard to see right here unless I were to zoom out. But you can also see the preview in this bottom right-hand corner here, where that's the main URL for this particular screen. And if I were to dive into project 2 and then hover over the URL here, you see that I have a deep link to this particular screen. I have a whole nother video on crafting deep links to Glide, where I kind of analyze how it's broken down and how you can leverage that to your ability to create deep links to anywhere in your screen. I'll post that in the description below. But we're actually going to leverage that feature here in order to build out some functionality inside of our form screen. But the main takeaway here is that any screen in Glide, whether it's a form screen, edit screen, add screen, details screen, any sort of screen in Glide that's not the main tab, right? So if I were to click on users or click on welcome here, these main tabs don't have this feature. But anytime I dive one screen deeper, whether it's, again, a form screen, add screen, edit screen, detail screen, new screen, whatever, the URL of that screen always ends in the row ID for the context of that particular screen. So because I dived into project 1, the row ID for project 1 is this RW0K something something, right? And if I were to hover over my URL preview here, we see that that's the context of the URL. So because I know that whatever screen I'm on has the row ID, there is a way where you can tap into that in your data editor in order to make some functionality happen. Once I discovered this, I started using it everywhere in every single app I started creating because it makes your app building experience more dynamic. Let me show you what I'm talking about. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the data editor. And again, we want to build this functionality inside of our users table because we have access to our users table inside of a form screen. And so the first thing we're trying to do here is I want to grab the context of the screen I'm currently on. There's a couple of ways to do that. One way is just by adding a template, right? I can add a template column here, and I can call this current URL, right? And sometimes I usually call this a current screen. I'm going to give this any sort of, I don't think I can just do a triple dots here. No, I have to give it a variable like 1, or it could be anything. And I'm going to replace 1 with the special value here of the URL of the current screen. Okay. And so now you see that whatever screen that I'm on, this current screen or this template column will show me exactly the screen that I happen to have open, not only in the data editor here, but also in the builder. So because I have project 1 open, again, we see here in the users table that that's the row that I have context of, right? And after to close this down and go to project 2, we see that it has this 2ZJ2 row ID, and inside my users table, that's exactly what you see here. All right, the next thing we do is we run a query. So I can add a query column here, current screen, and then I'll say like a query project. And the type here is going to be a query column. And the source is going to be our projects table. And we're trying to find the project that belongs to this URL. And again, the two matching criteria between those two things is that row ID. So I'm going to select my projects table, and we're going to filter our query to where the row ID of the project is included in this row, which is the users table I'm currently in, current screen. All right. So by selecting this, we're going to match the row ID of the project to the row ID that's found within the current screen row action here. All right. So I do that, and we see that project 2 was found, right? And that happens to match the screen that I currently have viewing. If I were to select project 1 and go back to my users table, we should see that it found project 1. So again, when I first discovered this was huge, because that means that any time where I needed to build out context from one table to another table that didn't really have any sort of matching data, I was able to just grab the current screen's URL and build it myself. So here we have the query. So here we have the context of the project 1 inside of a query. This happens to be a multiple relation. All queries are multiple relations. And what I'm trying to do is find out the one value that I need, whether or not it requires a signature. So I can't use a lookup because a lookup would generate an array based off of this multiple relation, this query. So instead, I have to use a single value column. So I'm going to just duplicate this to preserve my naming structure here. And I'm going to say project requires a signature. And in this case, I'm going to use a single value column. And I'm going to get the first, which is the only, right? We only see that there's only ever going to be one match because there's only going to be one row ID that matches the URL that you're on. So the first, which is the only from the query, and I'm going to find that requires signature value. I hit save, and now we see that we found that the value is true for project 1, which should make sense. And you would bet that if I were in project 2's context, it would show false. All right, so we have exactly the functionality that we need. If we needed to bring other values in for other types of purposes for that form screen, we certainly could. but for our use case, it's all we need for this particular app. And so now I can go back to my signature component, go to the visibility condition, and not have to worry that the value that I'm looking for isn't here because we just built it inside of the user profile table, where here we see current screen, project requires signature, and then we want the signature to show when it requires signature is checked. Okay, so project 1 requires a signature. We see that the name of the signature also isn't going to show anyway until they sign, and they're not going to sign unless signature shows up, so it's going to keep things nice and clean, right? And so if I were to go to project 2 here, we should see that there's no signature component. So it's a much cleaner experience, right? So all they would have to do here in this case is enter some notes, and then they could submit. Or project 1, right? They have to enter some notes, but they also have to add a signature. And because they entered a signature, they also have to add in the name, which is required. They can't submit yet until they've typed in a name and in some notes, let's say. And then they can submit. So it's my hope that this video helped you to navigate a form screen a little bit more confidently, to understand the difference between the source values and the destination values, and then again, how you can use a little bit of trickery inside of your users table to grab more values from the context of the screen that you're on in order to leverage those values inside of visibility conditions and filter conditions on components inside of that form screen. If you have any questions at all about any of the things that you've seen in this video, feel free to leave me a comment below. You can also reach out to me at Twitter at @rpetito. And as always, thanks for watching.